So when we look at this particular unit 3, which is leadership and management development, this is a unit close to my heart because a lot of organizations today, when they start off as businesses, as small businesses, at some stage require somebody in the organization who can be bold enough to take decisions, who can actually to a certain extent, as they say, show leadership. The reason I don't want to use the word leadership, but maybe show sense of direction in terms of where the organization is going. Somebody who has it in their mind, very clearly thought out process in terms of how the organization would grow, where would it go, and in terms of how it would achieve those objectives. So those bits are going to be something that we're going to learn today. Obviously, the concept of leadership and leadership. Now, the unit, the importance of this and important relevance of this particular unit is module, specifically the HRM is, even in the HR function, there are times wherein the leadership quality is required, and if you have good leaders within the department, then they are able to better manage, effectively, delegate, and then get the performance which is required from their own department or their own set of people which actually work for them. Now, leadership is also required in every other aspect of life. You require leadership at home. Probably sometimes it's the mother which is taking the leadership role at home when you're dealing with kids or issues or problems. Sometimes it's the partner which ends up doing that. You see leadership happening everywhere. You also see the concept of management everywhere, because sometimes you have more than one things to deal with, and in those cases what will happen is that you are trying to manage, as we use the word, juggle too many responsibilities or a few responsibilities, and that also involves the whole aspect of looking at managing or management. Now, in the context of this particular unit that we're going to look at in terms of learning outcome 1, we are going to be looking at the theoretical aspects of understanding what is leadership, what is management. We look at some of the leadership theories which have been, again, this is a study wherein we have to look at the theories of the past, which is the 1940s and the 50s. We have to look at the leadership theories in the mid-90s and 2000s, and then we have to look at the modern definition of leadership, which is something like the 21st century leadership required in most organizations, which are or businesses which are basically multinational or across various geographies. And then we look at a differentiation between things like, who's a leader, what are the qualities of a leader, what are the qualities of a manager, and how the two are different. And in the end, what we want to be able to do is, after studying these theories and after studying the differences between a leader and a manager, we need to be able to apply them to a particular situation. So this particular unit, we're going to discuss a lot of things. There are lots of slides that are put in which talk about, discussions, and the idea would be to try and get some thoughts and some, discussions going to try and nail out some of the theoretical concepts when we discuss leadership and management development. Because leaders, sometimes you would have heard the term that some theories when we discuss will talk about the leaders are born, they are not made. So if you were born, people who were born with a certain, background, they were treated as leaders, and that was the theory, which we look at in the early 1900s. So people only with certain backgrounds and, say, qualifications, experience could be treated as leaders. But now the modern day concept of leadership is that leaders are not born, they are made. And what you will get to see is that leadership as a fundamental concept has also evolved and grown over the years. And what we do get to see that people who want to become leaders have to exhibit certain qualities, certain traits, have to have knowledge and experience to be able to get into that position, which allows them to direct, lead, and manage a team. And the management aspect of the leadership, when we look at, is also an ongoing process wherein people start off with the basic roles, and at some stage, when they have enough experience, enough expertise or areas of expertise, then they, under their wings, are able to take on others who are needing to be developed or groomed to take up positions or say, for example, senior roles or positions within a company. And sometimes you will see that these two terms are used interchangeably. So those are the bits that we need to understand in the learning outcome one. So if I go through some of the slides in terms of our discussions for now, and then what I'm going to do is after this session, end up as always, sending you a bit of a handout, which will be a concise handout of all the leadership theories, starting with the concept when it originated, a few decades back, and then talk about management and the differences between the two, and how these can be then summarized, for the learning outcome one. So going into a few slides, looking at first, starting off with understanding what is leadership, why is it important, and the fundamental question at some stage it gets asked, which is leaders are born or are they, or can they be made? Now, definition of leadership, there are loads of definitions of leadership in the market, but I've chosen one which is from Professor Warren Bennis, and this talks about leadership as a function when it talks about that you know yourself, you have a vision, and that can be communicated to others in your team to be able to get some action done or get some objectives, or to meet some objectives. So in a basic example, if I say that let's look at an organization like Facebook, and because that's been in the news for the last couple of weeks because of this whole privacy issue. So if you look at this particular organization, we see one person driving the vision of the organization, what Facebook needs to be, how it needs to provide services, and at the end of the day, he is the one who's actually coming up with the ideas and the innovation in terms of how the product is moving from a simple product when it was introduced in 2005 as a networking service or as a social networking service. Now it has moved into something called chat, advertising. It has moved into things like shopping. You have something of an equivalent of eBay wherein people can list products and sell. You have networking, which is happening at an extensive level, and the data which is being produced can also be used to do a lot of other additional things. And this person, we can say, is in the position which is the leadership position, and he's kind of driving the growth of the organization. The product innovation is coming from his vision. Now, he must have not thought of it when he started this in 2005, but he had some ideas, and those ideas, he has kind of, built on those ideas over the years, and he's created a network of individuals which surround him in his team, which have then bought into that vision and those ideas that he has, and then he is then able to channelize, motivate, and then move them into that direction of, kind of working on those ideas to bring out his vision. And that is nothing but leadership. So it focuses on 3 or 4 things which are kind of highlighted in bold. That means people who are in leadership position, they have a vision. That is one, which is something which is very clear. The second thing that we are able to see, and these are qualities of leaders that we will also discuss, will be that they are people who are able to build trust amongst their colleagues. They are the people who can actually command respect, and they are able to build trust with the actions that they do and the things that they do, and that leads people to follow them in terms of what they are prescribing. And that is why I would say that this is the core definition of leadership. Is that okay?
Okay.
Now let's look at a quick example. Can we look at maybe talking about an example which you would have seen in either the news or in the articles or magazines that you read, wherein you've seen or heard about something like what is a strong leadership, and where you've seen somebody being criticized for weak leadership? Have you come across this situation? Can you think of 1 or 2 situations? And we see this on a daily basis on the news.
Maybe I can cite an example from when I was in the university. When you're in the university, there are times you would have to do a group work.
Okay.
So they will pair, like, let's say 10 or 15 of you guys to, focus on a particular topic. So you bring materials, then there will be a leader, a group, they call it a group leader, who will collate all those materials, together, then, put it into typing. Then after that, everybody would have to have their copy, read, then on the day of presentation, you choose those to go and represent your group to present.
Okay.
Now, if you don't have a good leader, for instance, and everyone brings materials, it will be hard for you to collate it and you will not get the best because it has to do with grades. So if you don't give a nice paperwork and a wonderful presentation, bringing those who are capable to do the presentation, then you wouldn't have good grades in school. So if you don't have a good leader or your leadership skill is weak, now this has to do with you, given a time frame for when they have to bring their materials in, because if you just say bring materials and you don't give a time frame, people will be lacking behind and they will be delaying the whole process of you collating and gathering materials. So you have to be a leader who knows what you want. You know the vision already, you know the time frame. You give the time frame that I need the materials between now and this date. If you don't bring it, just forget it, because you have to be strict at some point, because if you're not strict, then you will not get to where you're supposed to be. So after the materials, you as a leader would have to sit down, go through the materials, if it's making sense or not. And some people, though, of course, not everybody will bring materials that would be that would be relating to it. So you'd have to call those people back to explain to them, this is what I want, this is what I want. I need you to get more materials. What you brought is not something I can use. So you have to be strong in that area as a leader, and you have to put your feet down. You have to be firm in decision making, because if you're not firm in decision making, people will take you for granted, and before you know it, you'll not be able to deliver in the end, because of course there's a time frame for everyone to submit the assignments too. So if you cannot reach that time frame, then you will be recognized as a good leader. And on the day of presentation, of course, the first person they would look at, the lecturers sitting to listen to the presentation, will be, who is the leader? Who is the group leader? That's the first question they will ask you. They want to know if you're competent or not from your presentation skills.
That is correct. So just a quick word in terms of, I know you've answered the question, but maybe just to share a different aspect. When we talk about strong and weak leadership, if you look at the news, every day we get to see our politicians, and sometimes you come up with that, judgment of, I think, he's not showing a strong leadership. He's showing weakness in terms of his leadership. Like if certain decisions have to be taken, what that sometimes tends to happen is that people shy away from taking those decisions. And when you see that situation happening, you immediately say, okay, if it's the Prime Minister, or if it's a coalition government, or if it's a policy-making decision, and if the person is actually not taken the decision and is shied away, or has passed on that to somebody else, then you obviously come to a conclusion that, he's not shown good leadership. When you say he's not shown good leadership, you actually mean he's shown weakness in his leadership. And sometimes you will see that, like Donald Trump, for example, in the US, is actually standing up on some of his, promises that he's made in the election, even if they are not populist promises that he's done. But in order to look at his own established voter base, what he's doing is he's taking those decisions which are not being liked by the members of the public and even his own, party, but he is showing a strong head in terms of making those decisions, because he says, I made these promises because of which you elected me as president. I want to be able to show strong leadership, and he is showing a resolve in terms of, not those decisions. So as an exercise, what you've looked at is, when we look at the examples of strong and weak leadership, we can look at politicians, we can look at examples, as you mentioned, within a work team project that you're doing. When you look at your office or your employment, sometimes you will see, like you mentioned, your studies, submission of assignments. So that is where the idea is, yes, we want to be able to differentiate. And I think we will accomplish that by you answering that part of the question, saying, where do you see strong and when do you see weakness in terms of leadership? Okay, let's progress on to the next slide. Now here, what we are looking at basically saying is that there are lots of theories of leadership which have been proposed, and over the years these theories have undergone change. Now, we classify them as early theories. Early theories are the theories which you came across in the early 19th century. There were theories which were like great man theories, straight theories. Now here, if I have to look at synopsis, there is a great amount of detail that I can go into, but just for the purposes of the session that we're doing, great man theories basically believed on that leaders are exceptional people born with innate qualities and they are destined to lead. And that is where the origins of the great man theory comes from. They believe that there are certain type of people who are born with certain traits and they have the ability to be able to lead, and that is where they classified them as leaders. Now, in trait theories, it basically talks about that a lot of people did research on understanding what are the various qualities or traits which are required to be exhibited by an individual to get into a leadership position. And that's what I discussed briefly earlier, or alluded to briefly earlier. And these were then looked at being categorized under something called trait theories. So here, some of them, just to give you an example, sometimes when you apply for a job role or you apply for a position, and if it's a management position, they ask you to go through a certain amount of tests. Now, these tests could be psychographic tests, they could be aptitude tests, they could be tests to check your ability and your strength areas. But the idea of putting you through these tests during the interview stages by the HR is because they are looking at somebody to come in and lead the organization or lead the department. They want to make sure that what you've written in your CV actually conforms to what your skill set is. That is one. The second is they also look at the qualities. They want to look at a measure of these qualities, because what they do not want to do is induct somebody into the organization who's a very strong-headed individual. Sometimes you see people who are quite fixated on opinions, they are fixated on their own experience, and the organization wants to bring somebody in who's malleable, who's adaptable, and can lead the company by looking at enforcing values and missions of what the company stands for. So in order to kind of ensure, in short, that the person that they're bringing in that position, a management position, leadership position, is not a person who's going to come in and disturb the apple cart. That means he's not going to shake things up too drastically, and they look at a range sometimes with the use of these tests to see that the skill set they want is between a range of 60 to 80 if they are looking at hiring somebody as a manager, but they need to be in the range of 80 to 100 if they're hiring somebody as a leader. And the range is defined because some of these things are difficult to measure, and that is what the whole essence of the trait theories are. Now, sometimes a question, if I have to apply to the trait theory would be, how do you measure honesty? How do you measure loyalty? How do you measure passion? How do you measure enthusiasm? Now, there are no scales available for these kind of softer skills which are required in leaders when you're looking at interviewing people, shortlisting people. But what you need to be able to do is associate some of these traits that you are trying to measure with qualities that can be shown in terms of leadership. So honesty, loyalty would mean that the person is going to stay in the organization for a period of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. That ensures longevity in terms of employment. When you look at integrity, that would mean that the person is going to be a stickler for detail. He's going to be primarily looking at not allowing dubious practices to be developed within the organization, and that is what will show integrity. So they were going to ask you questions or ask you to undertake certain tests which will say and check your integrity. The integrity would mean, do you go by processes? Do you follow policies? Do you follow the code which has been led? And that basically shows integrity. So sometimes these things have to be looked at from a point of view of traits, and some of these traits are not easily measurable. So the trait theories actually focus on that. Now, let's look at understanding, with a bit of an exercise, what are traits. So can you think of a leader that you had?
Hello?
Can you think of a leader that you admire?
Okay. If I choose a leader I admire, I don't know. I'm not sure if you would know.
Anybody. So if you ask me that question, if you ask me that if I drop a blank that I don't have somebody that I look to or up to or admire, but just as a leader that you would look at that you admire.
Okay, from the media sector, because from the media perspective, there are so many people I admire so much and I look up to as models. Now, one is Richard Quest of CNN.
Okay, that's fine. So when you
the way he analyzes business and all that, it makes you want to listen more to him. You're interested in knowing what is happening in the business world because it's very dramatic, you know, from his gesture and everything, and you just enjoy what he's doing.
That's
and not everybody, not everybody can do that.
That's correct. So when you look at Richard Quest, that's what makes him a leader. That's fine. So you admire him. Now, what are the traits or skills that you think that makes him do that role very well when he runs that program, which is, you know, the Business Quest or the program that he runs on CNN? What are the things that you admire? So when you say you admire Richard Quest, that is fine. I understand. But what do you associate when you admire him? You look at some of his qualities. One of the things that you mentioned is that he does things which not, so what you mentioned, sorry, is that he presents a program which is very difficult to present, or the way he presents it, it makes it interactive and you want to watch that program because the things that he shares or the knowledge that he provides or the news or the whatever he's providing is something that you can relate to. And that could be one of the skills or traits because of which you are attracted to watch that program, isn't it?
Yes.
What we are doing in this case is when we look at, we admire somebody. Why we admire somebody is because we look at their personality, we look at their traits, we look at their skills, experience, qualities, and those are things that we get attuned to, and because of which we kind of say that I like this person or I do not like this person, and that is where you will probably end up saying Richard Quest. So if I just bring it up, just as an example, you say Richard Quest. So this is the person that we are talking about. He's a news presenter on, obviously the CNN. There are some qualities which he has, a journalist, which you like and you associate with, and that is what basically, makes him, kind of makes you admire him for the program he presents. And he presents, I know I've seen his program a number of times, who watch the news, and it's a prime time that he presents. He talks about the summary of business news from across the globe, and some of the interviews that he does with the personalities that he interviews as guests are quite intense. He does not shy away from asking very difficult questions, and he tries to get to bottom of, in terms of tries to the bottom of the problem. So that answers the question that sometimes you see. Now, he's not somebody who's actually grown into this role. He has done journalism for a number of years. He has a number of years of experience. He's worked in different geographies in the world, different countries in the world as a presenter for different television networks. And he's now come to a stage wherein he has lots of experience, lots of skills, lots of qualities, and that is what makes him a leader. So as a leader, he's acquired these traits or skills over years, which have actually helped him to get into prime time broadcaster's role on CNN as a television. And the moment you say Richard Quest, people associate with CNN because he's become a brand ambassador for them. He's such a popular person. The moment you say Richard Quest, you associate straight away with CNN, not with BBC or not with Fox News or Sky News or something else, but with CNN, isn't it? So that is where the lead comes out, because he's become a brand in itself, wherein people associate with him for news, and associate with him for strong journalism, and those are because of his traits and his qualities acquired over the years. That brings me nicely into the next slide in terms of, how do we differentiate between skills and traits? So we use these words interchangeably, but there is a very clear differentiation between these two, is that when we look at traits, there are some definitions of some types which are given here. So traits means you're adaptable to situation, you're flexible, you can adapt easily to a situation because of the experience that you have or because you previously experienced that particular situation. Sometimes you will see that if you burn your hand, you don't want to put the hand in the fire again because you want to be cautious, is because you have had that situation before. And because of that situation, what has happened is that it is difficult for you to, do that same mistake again. And that makes you adaptable to situations. So we look at some of the qualities in terms of how we define trait. We look at sometimes you're alert in the social environment. That means if you see people on Twitter and you see a tweet, or if you see people primarily using certain things in their social environment, they're quick to respond. For example, it could be an email which comes, they quickly respond to that. If it's a phone call, they quickly respond to that. And the reason sometimes you see this is because people are alert to the fact that they are in a social environment wherein they have responsibilities towards other people, and they have to either choose to respond or behave in a certain manner. And those are those are not skills, but those are traits in which you show and behave when you are in a particular context. So if you are in a party, or if you're attending a party or a dinner, you behave in a certain way. So you're behaving because you're showing a particular trait, that you have an understanding that you're attending a black suit and tie event or a dinner at somebody's place, and you are able to then adapt yourself to that environment in which you are socializing in that evening or in that in that context. So there are a number of traits that we can go through. Traits also include you're assertive. That means you're positively aggressive on certain decisions, discussions that you do, and you can assert your influence. You are cooperative, decisive, dependable. These are all traits that you see in leaders. But when we look at some of the skills that we can discuss, now skill is you're intelligent. The reason why it is a skill is because it can be measured. I can measure your intelligent quotient, IQ as we call it. And the moment you are able to measure something against a scale, that would become a skill. Conceptually skilled. That means given a project, given a situation, you are able to conceptualize where the problem is, diagnose where the problem is, and that is why it is a skill. Creative. When we say creative means you can think, you're given an idea, you can bring that idea into a drawing board. So you have some creative skills like sketching, you could be having creative skills to use software, Photoshop, and those are skills because you are able to take an idea from thought process to bring it onto a paper, and that would become creative skills. Diplomatic, being tactful, fluent in speaking a number of languages, all skills. Not everyone is able to speak, say, 5 languages or 6 languages. Everyone speaks maybe 1 or 2 mother tongue and their own language. But if you have more than 3 or more than 4 languages that you can speak fluently, or for example, you can write, read fluently, then you have that as an advantage, and that would help you get commercial benefit when you work. So as you can see, there are differences between skills and there are differences between traits. Are they clear?
Okay.
Okay. Now, when we look at some of the leadership theories that we want to now look at, so when we looked at early theories, and the idea was to try and understand the difference between skills and trait, and when we look at some of the theories which were introduced in the early 70s, here the concept had actually evolved, and they talked about that leaders can look at 3 different areas before they show this trait of leadership. They are task-oriented, they are team-oriented, and they are individually capable of doing a lot of things. So if you saw these 3 areas in people which were related to functional aspects of doing the work or getting involved in the work, then they were classified as something called functional theories, and they were centered on these 3 goals, essentially, that you were able to set tasks, set goals, you were able to work effectively within a team, you could also work individually given a task and bring it to a closure. Now sometimes when you look at these 3 areas, if they were overlapping and people showed that they had experience in these 3 areas, they were considered to be leaders. There were then behavioral theories, and behavioral theories basically talked about, this was proposed by 2, scientists which basically did research, Blake and Bolton, and they basically came across with something called a management grid. Now what they said is, no, it can't be trait, it can't be skills, it can't be just 3 functional areas. What they did was they did a grid, and in that grid they basically came up with a pattern, and that grid and the pattern basically talked about situations, and it talked about various aspects of traits, skills, and experience which allowed people to show leadership. Now here, what essentially are 3 points that we have to summarize, they look at is that leaders behave in a certain way and they exhibit certain skills and traits. And that is what basically made them something called production-oriented or people-oriented. Now, they were leaders which behaved in a certain type of way, and they were categorized as having to show leadership styles. And this is something that we've heard about quite a lot, that sometimes you see what style of leadership you have. You have an autocratic style, a persuasive democratic style, you have a consultative style. There are some different names, sometimes you call them. So autocratic, you have laissez-faire, which is more or less consultative, persuasive, and democratic. Now, depending on what style you kind of exhibited, you were put across in that particular grid. And then sometimes what it meant was that you were not either showing those actions or behaviors or neither showing these kind of styles. And that would have meant that you are in a position wherein you're showing leadership which is dependent on the situation that you're in. So this grid wherein they classified people on the type of behaviors and action, on the type of styles that they exhibit, and the situation which they would come out and show leadership was called the behaviorist theories. The other ones that we look at parallelly would be situational or contingency theories, and these were then proposed by two other scientists, which were Hershey and Blanchard, and they basically came up with a grid which talked about that sometimes when you show leadership because you are in a particular situation, and in this particular situation you are required to show certain competencies, and basis those competencies they classified the types of leadership which the people could be classified into. So their classification talked about directive leadership, coaching, supportive, and delegatory. And you had to show certain types of competencies, and those situations where you had the requirement of these competencies, you had to show certain motivational traits, and that was what classified them into something called the various leadership styles. Is that okay?
Okay.
Now the new leadership theory. Sorry, go ahead. You were asking.
Yes. Before the situational leadership theory, situational. Yes, I think the behavioral. I didn't really understand that.
So before the functional, behavioral.
Yes, could you please just explain a little more?
Okay, so basically,
I understand that of functional, but behavioral, I didn't really get it. Because the thing was breaking at that point.
See, there were two scientists, Blake and Hilton. They did some research in the early 1960s, and they came up with grid, which was called the managerial grid. And the grid was basically based on three aspects. One, they said that people who are in leadership positions actually show certain type of behavior or actions, and those behavior or actions actually make the people make these people exhibit leadership. And this leadership actually comes out because of their skills and traits. So example here would be that if you are faced with, say for example, there's a number of children which are traveling in a school bus, and the bus is to break down on the highway. Now, in this case, you have a situation wherein the bus is broken down, and there would be some requirement of somebody to step into the role of showing leadership. So what will happen is, maybe in this case, the bus driver or the person who is the conductor of the bus will basically show a bit of leadership, because it's a school bus, they might end up calling the school, and he will say, okay, if you get, all of you can come out. He creates a situation, shows a certain behavior or actions, collates all the children, stands away from the bus, puts a red sign there saying that, okay, the bus is broken down, and then in the meanwhile does some coordination. Now, in order for him to show that leadership, he is actually exhibiting some behavior, and that behavior is showing, leading to some actions, and those actions are being taken in order to secure the safeguarding of the children which are with the broken down bus. Now, this kind of a situation requires us to look at, looking on the leadership theories from the aspect of Blake and Moulton, which basically said that if you are in a situation and you show this leadership and that leads to some actions, that is where they basically talked about the managerial grid. And in some cases, they said sometimes if you are in a situation wherein you show persistently similar kind of leadership, say, for example, you say it's either my way or the highway, then that would mean the leader, is the person in that position is basically autocratic, because that person always wants his point of view to be taken forward, and because the person does not give too much maneuverability in terms of taking decisions, that means that leader is an autocratic leader.
Okay.
What they did was they had certain characteristics which were defined, and these were then taken up into something called the leadership styles. And there are 4 styles which actually emerged, and they have put that into the managerial grid as well. And the third one is, so the example that I gave you of the bus spring broken down is an example of the third one, which is different situations. The second one we talked about is a style, and the first one is when you show certain behaviors and actions. Now this was created into a grid, and because it is primarily dependent on certain behaviors that you're exhibiting and under situation, that is why these were called the behaviorist theories.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
I'll send you a bit of a handout. This is because we are doing a discussion and we are looking at covering this through the PowerPoint slides. I think a bit of reading that you need to do in the background to understand these, and that is where the handout on the leadership theories will come to you, which will explain them in a bit more detail. But here, what I've done is on the slides, I've just put the very crux of why they were classified as these kind of things, either functional, behavioral, leadership traits, or trait man theories. Now, the new theories, when we look at the current, time frame, which is the early 2000s and modern frame, here, we are looking at something called the transformational theory. There is something called TF, transformational and transactional. These are 2 terms which have come out on the modern context of, the leadership theories. And the modern context of leadership theories talk about transformation or transactional side of things. And they are then correlated to something which is something that is being followed today, and that is to do with the 21st century leadership. So we'll come to that also. But here, transformational leadership is when leaders inspire people, develop trust, they encourage creativity and also growth. An example of this I will give you is, have you heard about Dell computers?
Yes.
Right. So this company, which was started by Michael Dell in the early 1990s or whatever, we look at him being at the helm of this company and being the CEO for about 20-25 years before he, became the chairman, and he had somebody else come in and run the operation. When Dell as a model, as a company, came out with this business model that, you could shortcut and go directly to the manufacturers, configure your PC. Before we bought PCs using Hewlett-Packard and, IBM and, this and that. And you had to look at buying standard configurations. But Michael Dell, when he started his company, he came across with this idea of that you can build your own PC, you can configure your own PC. So when he brought across this business model into the formation of the company and led this company for about 20-25 years, the company was extremely successful. What he did was he transformed his vision and the industry into something, and Dell became a force to reckon with. Dell was #1 computer brand for a number of years, and they outbid IBM, Hewlett-Packard, some of the old, players in the industry. And because of their model, because of the new business model and the leadership that he showed, because he kind of cut out all the middlemen, the manufacturers, and straight away you could go and place orders. That became something called transformational. So he was able to create a business from an existing industry and then transform his vision into a multi-billion-dollar business. Now, the point that I'm trying to come across to is that's the background. Now, when he left the company business started to decline. The company got listed on the stock exchange, and then after a few years, he decided that he wanted to take the helm of the company back. He wanted to come back into the company, came in, and he took the company private. Now, again, he decided that, okay, when he created the business was more PC-centric. PCs were required. People were buying PCs. But in the modern times, the business had stayed behind. That means they have not looked at tablets. They have not looked at the mobile phones. Some of the other products which were being caught on, like cloud computing, Dropbox, and all the other businesses which have come about. And he did feel that what has happened is that because of this, the company is losing market share and a lot of other companies are overtaking. So he came back to the company and then he redirected the vision of the company to focus on certain other areas. So he went into something like servers, he went into cloud computing, he went into tablets, and some of the other products that he introduced, and that brought across again a second transformation within the company. And Dell again is starting to grow, is again becoming a business to reckon with, because they have lots of different services that on which they are able to compete with in the market. So when you look at this as an example of Dell Computers, you see the business has been transformed when he started, but then when he came back and the company started losing revenue, losing market share, he was again able to inspire leadership within the company by building trust, bringing in new products, and then building new products to again take the company from being a company losing market share and revenue to again being a company which was essentially gaining market share, and again has become a leader in some of the areas. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is an example wherein what we look at when we look at transformational theory, and Vas and Avelio are a few people who have actually worked on the transformational theory, and they talk about that leaders, when we look at leaders and when we look at transformation within organizations, businesses, we do get to see that they are people who are able to, inspire, they're able to lead, build trust, going back to the original definition, and they're able to inspire creativity and personal growth. So he came across and introduced something called the employee stock option plan. That means if the company is successful, you get stock options and you're able to sell those stock for larger compensation and benefits when you work for the company, and that was liked. And that promoted a culture of, people genuinely taking interest to introduce new products or suggestions for new products within the company, which has allowed it to recapture, some of the market that it was losing. When we look at, we talked about so much about leadership. Let's look at very briefly about philosophies. The reason why we talk about philosophy is sometimes you will see that, Nelson Mandela, for example, was a brilliant leader. He's the father of the nation for South Africa. He's very well respected across the world. You look at Barack Obama, for example, he's very well respected as the president. He brokered the nuclear deal with Iran and all that stuff. So he's done some of the things in his presidency wherein he's withdrawn, for example, forces from Afghanistan, Iraq, and others, and he's been liked because of the policies that he's, or the decisions that he's taken and the policies that he's, created when he was the president or under his presidency. Now, why do we talk about these things? We are talking about nothing but philosophy, because what we do see when you talk about, say, some of the great leaders that we think about, say Mahatma Gandhi, he believed in non-violence. So he said, okay, if the British have to leave India, he believed in non-violence, and most of his, protests and other things were done non-violently. And he became synonymous, becoming the father of the nation, like Nelson Mandela and stuff, and is very well respected. Now, his philosophy was nothing can be achieved with violence. So when we talk about these things which affect and at some stage become a prominent part of leadership, we need to think about, or we need to talk about something called philosophies. So when we look at leaderships in the modern context, today's philosophies are centered around things like corporate social responsibility, how green you are, carbon emissions. We talk about things which are related to waste management, recycling, companies associating with charities in order to kind of support moral objectives or objectives which are close to the mankind in terms of promoting equality. So when we talk about the ethical side of things and we talk about, say, philosophy, we talk about ethical side of leadership, and the ethical side of leadership could involve things like CSR, it could involve sustainability. Everybody that you talk about, from politicians to large CEOs, the CEOs of large organizations, talk about sustainability today. We hear a lot of news about the plastic in oceans, and the reason why a lot of these large companies are being blamed is because what they're saying is we have only one earth, we have one environment, and we need to be sustaining the environment so that we can hand over this to our children or great-great-grandchildren, and that is where the concept of sustainability comes in. So there are some aspects that we have to look at to understand leadership philosophies, and the ones that are very popularly discussed and seen by most large organizations nowadays are the ones that we look at, things like equality, diversity, sustainability, and the corporate social responsibility. Now, this as a particular thing that we look at is based on, what Alan Chapman actually proposed, saying that, we have one planet, we have a lot of people on it, and it's, basically owned by everyone. There's not single one person which owns everything. So what we have to be doing is basically looking at, protecting an environment, and protecting our environment would mean that we have sustainability, we have moral responsibility, and when we talk about probity, what we are talking about is actually the probity of having some moral principles. Things like, we want to, when you go to a holiday, for example, you want to make sure that you leave the beach and other things as clean, because it's your responsibility to leave it that way, because there are others who are also going to be able to, use that as a feature, as a functionality over a point in time when they come in for their holidays. So here, the idea is to understand these core aspects, and the idea would be to try on 1 and 2 to understand why sometimes leaders within organizations will associate certain responsibilities and take on the role of, being the, let's put it this way, the ambassador of driving that within the organization, and that is to show a bit of change, and that change could be related to corporate social responsibility. An example of that I will give you would be that a lot of companies are looking at now using things like paperless office, or talking about paperless office, using less and less paper, because that means you're cutting down less number of trees, which shows a bit of responsibility. So is this clear?
Yes. CSR, I want to believe that's corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, for that, you said it falls under the leadership philosophies, that's ethical leadership. Like, for instance, I don't know if they do that in other countries, like in Nigeria. For instance, let's say, I don't know if you know this network provider, MTN.
Yes.
MTN, what they do as a social responsibility is they have a foundation, like for eye surgery. Maybe you have cataract, or you have any eye challenges. There's a foundation that operates or does surgery on those individuals that were chosen randomly. They operate on them for free. Yeah. And the cost is on them. It's on MTN.
So basically what they've done is they have taken on some sort of a social responsibility, because they are a large business and they've identified a cause within the country which relates to, providing certain, let's put it this way, free of charge, or no expenses based surgery, which allows people to correct their vision. So this is a part of, something called social responsibility, because as a business, is a very large business, multinational organization, which with about, I think $1 billion+ in revenue. What they're looking at is that because they're a large business, they are looking at a bit of moral responsibility to be able to contribute back towards society. And that is a good example when we look at social, corporate social responsibility. But the whole essence of, just to elaborate that, the whole essence of corporate social responsibility comes in when you have a business which is international, MCN. I don't know whether it operates across a lot of other countries in terms of giving, mobile phone connection. But under the international regulation, sometimes what tends to happen is a lot of companies look at a bit of self-regulation. And that self-regulation is basically looking at the aspect of, creating an organizational strategy to say that this is a business or a cause that we are going to associate with, and we are going to support this cause to kind of eradicate, say, poverty, or say, for example, eradicate, water poverty, or say, for example, provide safe and, clean drinking water in certain countries. And that is what they want to be known as morally about, in the market, in the industry. Like if you look at Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble donates, when you buy Pampers, nappies, Procter & Gamble donates 5 pence for every package of nappies which people buy. and they send it to a particular charity which they have associated with. And the idea is, what they're saying is, your profits, the products that you buy and the profits that we make, some part of it is going to do some greater good, and that is under the social responsibility or moral responsibility, and that is being driven under the leadership of the the organization by the CEO. And they've identified that this needs to be done in order to bring back some benefits into the society, because we are making profits on the basis of people buying goods and services. Okay. Let's look at a small exercise. Now, what we're talking about here is, you need to look at, for discussion's sake, you look at a situation wherein you are the team leader, and what are the job responsibilities you would do as a team leader in that role. So here, this is a bit of food for thought. I think we can discuss this in detail, but the idea of giving you this as an exercise is to look at if you're asked to be a leader, then think of a situation. Let's not look at, okay, I'll be the president of the country or prime minister of the country or something. Let's look at reasonable. If I'm being asked to lead a project or do a particular thing wherein amongst a group of friends, can you help me raise money for charity? So you're taking up that project, and then in that project, your responsibility is a leader. What are the key things that you would do in that particular role is what you need to list down. And that, when you list down, what we will do is we'll break it down into something like, what are going to be specifically your responsibilities, and what are the responsibilities going to be of the people who you are going to lead. So example would be, if we assume a small charity event. Now you're trying to raise money for charity, you're going to do an event which is maybe a dinner, but there will be 5 or 6 people which are working on this project. One of you could be doing the sales and marketing, one of you could be doing financing, one of you could be looking at administration, and one of you could be looking at doing, say for example, operational role. Now, the reason you will pick up these roles, and somebody who will be the team leader, that means they will coordinate, delegate, review, and press the right buttons at the right time so that these things can be done. So if you look at the 5 people working on that project to raise charity, say for example you want to raise $1 million naira, for example, in Nigeria. That's about, say, 300, 400 pounds, something like that, I'm assuming. Now, if you want to raise that money, you have different set of people. So one person whose good qualities could be networking, dealing with businesses, could be held with the responsibility of, looking at speaking to local businesses to sponsor and raise money through sponsorship. Somebody who's good with finance numeracy could be looking at, things like, okay, once the money comes in, I need to look at allocating money for flyers, leaflets, dinner, caterers and things like that. Somebody could look at the other role. And here, the team leader role is what you need to focus on, is what would the person in the leadership position do, will help you decipher the roles and responsibilities of yourself and also the other people in that team. So that would give you a clear indication of sometimes how you differentiate as a leader. Now, leaders look at not only delegating jobs, but they also look at, after the delegation is being done, they also want to hold people accountable. That, have you been able to do this? Have you been able to, achieve this? And if they have not been able to do that, what they will then do is do a bit of a review and put together some sort of a plan to kind of ensure that this does not happen in the future. So they might put you into some sort of a training, ask you to do a bit of development through, say, maybe attending a training, or give you some feedback, which will help you at the end of the day, achieve or do that task if that has to be done the second time around. So leaders essentially would look at responsibility, delegation, but also look at accountability. That means hold you responsible for why it has not happened or why this has happened. If that has happened, you will then share it with the other team to dissipate that as a best practice. Sometimes you will see that if you do a particularly good job within your department or the person that you're working with, what they do is they tend to highlight that very clearly with some of the other colleagues, is because they will say, okay, she has been able to do this, and though we had given her limited resources, she was able to accomplish this or achieve this. And that would then be shared as a best practice, because they want, in general, 2 or 3 things to happen. One, they want to basically look at saying that they want to motivate you, They want to talk about your achievements. They want to share some of the things that you did right, which will help others pick up as some of these things as a coach or as a mentor, and you then would be able to bring that into the aspect of coaching and mentoring when you look at asking your colleagues to be able to do the same job. So here the idea would be to look at understanding what is accountability, what is responsibility, and what is authority. Now these things have to be very clear in terms of the concept, because they all mean different things. Accountability is when you delegate something and you make somebody accountable, that you are answerable. Accountable means you are answerable. That means if I've given you an X amount of budget, for recruitment and selection, and you are not able to recruit the people within those budgets, or you have not recruited, then you are answerable. You are accountable, and that would mean accountability. Responsibility would mean that you are primarily, given the task, and at some stage, if the things are not happening, then you have the ability to be able to take a call that, okay, if this is not happening, then I would stop it. Essentially, sometimes you hear this word which says, okay, the buck stops at me, because I'm the one who's responsible for the business. I'm the one who's responsible for the cash flow, or you are the one who's responsible for making the final call. And that is where the word responsible comes in. Now, when we look at authority, sometimes you will see that authority means absolute power. That means you will see a leader and manager, the person having both the leader and manager role. That means he has the final say if the budget has to be approved, but he is also the final say in terms of when the review actually is done. That means if the review is done in terms of how best the project was completed, how much money was saved, or how much money was spent, he also does the review as a leader, but he's also the manager who also then looks at that from a point of view of the success. And that would mean that you look at the position wherein you have authority. Now, sometimes you will see that the leaders will exhibit all the three traits. They will have accountability, they will have responsibility, and they will also have absolute authority. Can you think of a role within the organization wherein all the three are then in one particular person or one particular position?
Like the HR manager.
Mm-hmm.
Now.
So in this case, rightly said, if you look at a department, the head of the department, whether it's the HR head or the finance head or the marketing head, they would have absolute responsibility because they are managing performance of 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 200, 500 people, whatever. They would be also accountable if the department does not achieve the objective or the laid down objectives for the year. They will be accountable. And finally, they have the authority to hire and fire the set of people within the department in order to make sure that they are able to achieve the objectives which have been set by the management. Mm-hmm. Correct? So you see all three also sometimes present, like a CEO, the chief HR officer, or the CX, as we call it, the chief operation, chief financial person who's at the top of the department, top of the, say for example, the food chain, in this case, the ecosystem where you work, would be the person who would primarily be accountable, responsible, and also have the authority. Now, again, to understand this concept, what I put together is a bit of an exercise here, saying you think of a situation wherein you have had an issue, but you did not have the authority to resolve it. Can you think of a situation wherein you worked within a company or an organization wherein you worked as a leader but did not have the authority to resolve it, did not have the final say on the decision?
Okay. Now, let me cite an example from my workplace.
Yeah.
There was a time we needed to package a program that will go on air the next week.
Okay.
So we had a number of people to work as a group.
Right.
Now, fortunately, or should I say unfortunately, I was made the group leader.
Okay.
But of course, I had senior colleagues in the group. I mean, my seniors, those who are ahead of me in the service, in the group. And you would have challenges trying to control those people because they are your bosses one way or the other.
Yeah.
But now, as a stand, they had to be at your beck and call because they are under you for this group work.
Okay.
So after delegating responsibilities to people that I need you to bring this material, I need you to focus on this, you bring that, you bring that. You know, other people brought theirs, but because they are your bosses, because they're your senior colleagues, they were so adamant for the fact that why would they choose a junior colleague over me to head a team? So they did not bring their materials. And you being a junior colleague, you wouldn't want to be rude.
Yes.
Talking to them. So after, you know, persuading, after pleading with them, and they turned out to be difficult, I didn't want to use veto power because it's wrong for you to start imposing what is not things like that on your senior colleagues. You have to be very diplomatic in dealing with these people.
Correct.
So I left them. I now went to meet their superior, which is our overall boss.
Yes.
And I explained the whole situation to the man. And I told him, you need to come in to speak to these people, to bring materials, or else we would fail in, you know, airing the program. And you know the consequences of failing to air a program. You will be queried. And I don't want to be queried because of these people. And if they don't bring materials, I cannot work alone. We need to work as a team. Of course, I'm your junior colleague, but I'm not even working like I'm the boss here. I'm working like we are all colleagues. We are on the same level. But they need to bring materials and they need to sit down to do what they're supposed to do, because I cannot, for instance, I cannot do the interview to go and conduct an interview session today, and tomorrow I go and do vox pop. It's too much for one person, and I sit down to edit these things. I now collect materials, you know, to link the script, you know, and dovetail. I said it's too much for one person. So these people need to help out. And they're more experienced, so they should understand this. So my boss had to come in to speak with them that they need to work hand in hand with me for us to have a good production. And that was dead. That was the only time they now came back and like, okay, let's do it together. Initially, they felt bad about the whole situation. How can they pick a junior colleague over us?
That's fine. So basically, in this situation, if I have to summarize this, what you picked up is absolutely correct with the example. So if I have to summarize this, what will be that you were essentially responsible for the group, but did not have the decision-making power to hire or fire or, you know, straighten the persons up who were not able to deliver the things which were required. So you basically were the manager, but did not have the authority to discuss it with colleagues which were senior to you, even though they were in your team. So this is a typical situation wherein you are put into a leadership role, but you have not been given the authority to resolve situations or issues which arise because that is not being delegated to you. A simple example which I'll give you from another organization would be that you have been given a plan to work on, like you've been given, like, okay, we need to achieve sales of this much. You've been asked to create a promotional plan, but the person has not been given a budget to look at for that promotional plan. Now, in this case, the budget is with the owner, but in this case, the manager is doing all the planning. So when it comes to he discussing and negotiating with the agencies to get hold of rates and advertisements and things like that, he does, when he gets asked a question and what is your budget or how much you're looking at achieving or doing, he does not have a straight answer because he does not have the authority to take a final call on the budget in terms of money that will be spent, but he is still being given the task of being the manager to put together a promotional plan. So it's an example, and the reason why I put this up here is you nailed it, is because we need to be able to understand what is the difference between accountability, responsibility, and authority. Now, there are some other activities that I put together in the slide. Now, this is something that you could look at doing for understanding the concept of leadership in particular, and these are activities that you should do offline. The other thing which I've done is I've put together a small video which has been taken on, from YouTube. And what I would suggest is if you want to watch this video, watch it, because it will tell you how to improve your leadership skills. And then towards the end, what I would ask you to do as an exercise would be to do a SWOT analysis of your leadership abilities. So you do a SWOT, which you will look at, which is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then look at it from a context of, just leadership. Are you able to be a leader? What defines your leadership style? What are the traits that you show? What are the skills that you have? And that is what you list out as an exercise. Now, this exercise is not directly related to your assignment brief for this particular unit. But the idea is, because it's a very interesting topic and we all apply for jobs and we have careers and things like that, sometimes what you'll have to look at is you'll have to look at applying some of these things to your own leadership or to your own personality. And it will be a good start if you could look at something like this just as an exercise, so that when you are HR and when you have that responsibility, you know exactly how a SWOT analysis on leadership can be done. And you can put together some sort of action plan to say, okay, you show these skills, you show these traits, but you need to move from A to B, and this is where the plan of development is. Is that okay?
Yes.
So what we today looked at in brief, for the particular session is looked at understanding what is leadership. We've looked at what are the various theories of leadership, summarize them, but I'll send you a handout after the session so that you can read them in a bit more detail. We've understood what is the difference between skills and trait and how do you effectively differentiate them when we talk about the concept of leadership. We have looked at a number of short exercises. What are the roles and responsibilities of leaders within an organization by picking up some of the examples and relating them to some of the theories like transformational theory. And then the key understanding and differentiation between the concept of what is responsibility, what is accountability, and to a certain extent talking about authority. These three concepts which basically help you clearly differentiate, define leadership and the people who are in that leadership position. And the idea towards the end of this would be to relate to a task that is in your assignment, which is to say develop a plan of your own leadership. And that is something which will come across in one of the tasks that you are asked to do when you look at the case studies of Southwest Airlines and or Starbucks, and you have to pick one of them up to discuss the leadership approach which the organization needs to take. And here you have to assume that you are the CEO of the organization and what will be the leadership that you will take in that situation. So this will be helping you when you do your SWOT, when you do your SMART analysis, and you watch this video to look at how you can develop your leadership, which will help you directly in doing the task of the assignment. Is that okay?
Okay.
Good stuff. So I'll end this session here for now, and I'll send this copy of the presentation. I'll put this copy of the presentation and on the Moodle along with the handout, which I'm going to send you on the email for you to read.
Okay.
Any questions? Fire away the email, and I'll come back to you pretty much after that.
I would appreciate the recording for the class too, so I can listen again.
I will send it to you.
Okay.
Okay. Whatever the session
Is that an assignment now?
Is that enough?
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, tell me.
Are you giving the assignment again for this unit?
I can email you all the assignments for all the units so that you have it.
No, I have the assignment for all the units already. I'm saying this one now that you're giving, we've received today, leadership and management development. Are we done with this?
No, we're not done with this. There are 2 more sessions or 3 sessions. So we've only done
no assignment for now.
No assignment. We've only done the session today. There are loads of things.
I'm not done with the 2 units to finish, so I just want to be sure I don't have another one on my plate.
That's fine. No, this is no assignment for now. We have this. We have 1 session for this unit, which is today. Then we have another session for this unit on Friday. Then we have 2 other sessions to cover this unit, which is primarily on next Thursday and Friday. So I've sent you invites for 27th, 29th, 5th, and 6th July. So after that, what we will do is we'll do a break for about a week or so that you can finish the 3 assignments. We can absolutely assess them and say they're ready for certification. And then we will start the next unit.
Okay. Because the assignments are quite bold.
I understand that there are, now the school breaks happen in most places. So, people will also travel, holidays, we are graduates.